I was first elected 10 years ago as clerk of the township. The outgoing clerk stressed a few vital people, and one of them was Brian Ledmers. In fact, she put it in her very last statement on the record in the minutes, was praising our social worker and our community services administrator. And she mentioned this, she's like, Jerome, he helps in every way possible. And any of you who have worked with the township know, Brian, like all of our staff members, do many things for us. They're not seeking recognition and glory, but they're all about helping people, helping our board, helping us all do better. So I'm going to introduce Brian. We've asked him tonight to speak about social services and peer jury programs. So if you'd welcome him.
Thank you very much. I'm here tonight to talk about 20 years of peer jury history. And I started work for the township in 1997, and there were a lot of things that the township didn't do then that we do now, and one of those is peer jury. So I'd like to talk a little about how the program got started, share a little of data with you, talk about a few funny stories that I can share about peer jury, and then at the end we're going to hear from three of our jurors who can really tell you more about what peer jury means to them than I can. So let me start with a quote though. There's a book out by William Gaddis, who is a National Book Award winner for a book called A Frolic of His Own, and the very first line in the book says, "Justice, you get justice in the next world. In this world we have the law." And then my favorite actor, Paul Newman, in his closing statement to the jury in the movie The Verdict, notes that there is justice in our hearts. And I think peer jury is something that takes kids and the police and all the parties away from the complexities of the courtroom and the legal system with prosecuting attorneys and defense attorneys and judges, and it's an adversarial process, and which is sometimes more concerned with process than outcomes, and it puts them all into a room where they have to admit their guilt and makes them take responsibility for their actions and makes an effort to redress the crime in their hearts, as well as through some disciplinary action and some restorative justice measures. And we started the program in 1998, and I brought the idea to our township board in 1997 when I first started working here. And the township board liked the idea. I had some experience in helping some communities up in Round Lake get one started when I worked with United Way of Lake County. And but I can tell you that the community and the police departments were not 100% initially supportive of the idea. There was a perception that this is a wealthy community, as we all know, and that sometimes parents think that they can buy their way out of a kid's trouble, or they don't want their kid to be held accountable because of concerns about getting into college and everything. I mean, some of those concerns are legitimate. But we got the go-ahead from the police departments to explore the idea, and we recruited a gentleman from the community. His name was Howie Clinch, Houston Howie Clinch. Howie is deceased right now, God rest his soul. Howie was a great schmoozer with the police departments, and there were a lot of things that had to be done in order to get this program started. We had to get the support of all the local police departments. That was Howie's job. I recruited all of the community service sites and recruited jurors from the high schools. And in a relatively short period of time, about 6 months, we had a peer jury manual, we had 18 to 20 community service sites, and what was interesting was that the police departments that were initially the most sort of apprehensive about the program, we got our first cases from them in September of '98. And but before we did that, we also had to visit some local peer juries. And I remember going out and looking at peer juries in Palatine, which is where I'm from, and Buffalo Grove, and Rolling Meadows. And one of the things that Howie and I were both wanted the peer jury to do, we wanted it to be a kid-driven program. We wanted it to be run primarily by the high school kids who serve as jurors. Now I have to do some administrative things and maintain records and everything and communicate with police departments on an ongoing basis. But we wanted kids to make the decisions in peer jury. And some of the peer juries that we visited were primarily adult-driven. The adults made most of the decisions. The kids were just kind of there to acknowledge the adult's decision. So we wanted ours to be a very kid-driven program. At the time, there were about 200 peer juries in the United States. Now there are over 2,000 peer juries. So this is a concept that is here to stay. It's one that many, many communities support. And this is an example of the township being a mobilizer of organizations in the community. I don't think any one police department has been able to carry this out, but the township, working with Wilmette, Kenilworth, Glencoe, and Northfield, has this program up and running. Our first cases, I said, were in September of '98. Aurelia Paczynski, who was the clerk of the Circuit Court of Cook County, came in and swore in our very first jurors. We met over at the Village Hall in Winnetka, and Howie Clinch was the moderator, and I ran all the, we had a group of youth advocates who worked with the jurors in making decisions. So now through 2018, we have heard 699 cases in peer jury, average about 30 cases per year. Now every case has a story. I'm not going to give you 699 stories, relax. So, but some of the principal reasons why kids get in trouble are drugs and alcohol is clearly one of the major reasons why kids get in trouble. And about 1/3 of our cases involve drugs and alcohol. Kids also get in trouble because of just plain bad decision making. And we've all been there. We all made bad decisions as kids. We sometimes make bad decisions as adults as well. And then another reason why kids get in trouble is peer pressure. Kids often tell us, it wasn't my idea, they pressured me into doing it. And then finally, kids get in trouble because they tell us they're just bored, there's nothing to do around here. I don't agree with that, but anyway, so over the course of peer jury, about 1/3 of our cases have involved drugs or alcohol. About 1/3 of our cases have involved criminal damage to property or criminal trespass or theft, some sort of destruction of public or private property. And then about 1/3 of our cases have been a very mixed bag, where just when I think I've seen everything, something new comes along. In fact, I think peer jury has kind of been reflective in some ways of some of the changes in our society. Early on, we saw more of the theft and criminal damage to property cases, but as technology has become more prominent in all of our lives, and especially we all know how much kids love their technology, we started seeing technology-related cases, cyberbullying, inappropriate uses of technology, transmission of harmful and pornographic material, kids using technology inappropriately. We saw our share of opioid cases where kids were selling or distributing or just giving to their friends opioids, not aware of the potential harmful effects of them, or giving people prescription drugs for things they don't have a prescription for can be incredibly dangerous. Now with vaping on the rise, we've seen a huge number of vaping cases in peer jury, especially with THC in them. This is an epidemic that's going on right now at the local schools, and a lot of those kids are being sent to peer jury. So just when I think we've seen everything, I'm sure something new is going to come along very soon. So the offenses that we get in peer jury impact groups on multiple levels. First of all, many crimes impact the community. Some crimes are, an offense against the community, criminal damage to property, theft. There are victims in many cases. A victim, the school can be a victim. When you steal from somebody, there's a victim. Other peers can be, have offenses can impact them. The kids who get involved in the offense, often, many of our cases are group cases where there's 2, 3, 4, 5. We've had as many as 10 kids come in front of peer jury at the same time, all for the same related offense. And of course, the offender themselves is a victim in some ways. What isn't often talked about, though, and what peer jury tries to address is that, and what kids often don't understand is that when they do something that gets them in trouble, it affects their family and it affects their parents. And this is what brings in the concept of restorative justice, which is an essential principle of peer jury, in that we emphasize repairing the harm that's caused by an offense. This is best established through some sort of cooperative process where the victim might be involved, the family, various stakeholders in the community sometimes get involved. The police are here, and of course the offender themselves. And this can lead to kind of sometimes a transformation of people, relationships and communities. And it's a different way of thinking about crime and our response to crime, in that we focus on repairing the harm that's done. Now, restorative justice can be a much more problematic thing in juvenile law. I don't know how many of you know about juvenile law. If any of us were to go across the street and rob the county's pharmacy and we get caught, our name would be in the paper. However, with juveniles, their names are kept out of the paper. An offense would be listed, but the offender's name is kept out of the paper. This is because juveniles are given more of a break by the law. Now, this can be a very difficult thing for many victims to understand, in that I can tell you many times in the course of peer jury, I have had kids have done something. For example, we had some kids who were playing a rather cruel game of ding dong ditch to an Asian family in the community these kids went back to the house 15 or 20 times, and they felt targeted and picked on, and they were. And they demanded to know who these kids were who had done this. Or we've had kids who've done criminal damage to private property, and the families demanded to know who did this. And the police tell them, we can't tell you. Juvenile law protects the identity of perpetrators. And so sometimes they call me to find out who it is, and I tell them I cannot tell you. But what we do allow, though, is the victim can write what's called a victim impact statement, where the victim can prepare something that will be read to the jury, will be read in the presence of the offender, and they can understand what kind of impact their actions had upon the family or the victim. And this is a critical part of our peer jury program, and a critical part of restorative justice. We also, it's one of the key ways that we hold them accountable. We also have kids write apology letters. Now, sometimes we have kids write apology letters to victims, but they can't write their name on the apology letter because their identity is protected. But I've had families call me up saying how much they appreciated the fact that we made the kid write an apology letter to the victim. But I'll tell you, the most common apology letter that we have offenders write is not to the victim, it's to their parents. Now, how many of you have you ever, we all have children here, right? How many of you have ever had their kid write an apology letter to them for something they've done to you, or something they've done that was wrong? We've seen many instances where a kid reads an apology letter to their parents in court. There's a tearful embrace, a family reunites, parents regain trust of their kid, which is a critical part of the process. We make sure that kids understand that they have broken their parents' trust quite often, or broken the trust of the community, and writing an apology letter is a way to address that. And it's something we talk about quite often in peer jury. So let me share some data with you. As I mentioned, we've had about 699 cases in peer jury through 2018. 82% of our cases are boys, but not surprisingly, but when we do see girls, unfortunately, they tend to be more damaged. They tend to have more issues. It's interesting, boys, those of us who are male, note that when we were young, we could be friends with somebody one day, enemies with somebody the next day, and friends with them again the next day. Boys just seem to be a little more resilient in that regard. Boys clearly seem to act more impulsively, are more influenced by peer pressure to make bad decisions, and sometimes with boys the urge to destroy seems more powerful than the urge to create. I can attest to that myself. But girls seem to have a harder time getting over being slighted or being bullied or not included. And so I think sometimes there's more of an emotional impact when girls get in trouble. Wilmette and Winnetka have sent us the most cases in peer jury history, but every community in New Trier Township, Wilmette, Winnetka, Kenworth, Glencoe, and Northfield, at least 1 year has sent us the most cases, so we've had active participation from all the communities in New Trier Township. The most common question I get is, what's the success rate of the program? And now we measure success by, does a kid successfully complete his community service and get a reasonably good evaluation from his community service site? And in that respect, we have a 96% success rate. 673 kids out of 699 got their sentence done, got a reasonably good evaluation from their community service site, and were released without having a juvenile record. We've had 6 kids who had to be sent to an out-of-state substance abuse rehabilitation treatment program. So that is not included in that data, and I consider that a success as well because the kids got some help for the issue that they had. We've had 20 kids in 20 years who failed to get their sentence done. Remanding an offender back to the police department is a painful process for the program. It's a painful one for the jurors to make, and I stress it's the jurors that make that decision, not the adults. And it's not something the jurors take lightly. We often give a kid a second chance to get their community service done, or maybe we add some hours or add some additional penalty. We don't like sending a kid back to the police and back to juvenile court. But most often kids do learn, and kids often come up with some incredibly eloquent statements or thoughts on what they have learned. Better decision making, thinking before you act, revisiting how they handle peer pressure, or making better choices of friends and activities. My favorite lesson learned was stated quite simply by a young man who was arrested for tipping over porta potties at construction sites, which is a very messy proposition. And we sent him, so we asked him what he learned, and he said, "I learned when you make a mess, somebody has to clean it up." We sent him to the Wilmette Park District, which is where we often send kids who do one of the park districts. And this kid helped out. The park districts often host birthday parties. And he had to clean up cake and ice cream off the floor at birthday parties for his 50 or 60 hours of community service, which seems appropriate when you consider that he tipped over porta potty. So I think that's a good success story. Justice was served. We try to send kids often who do criminal damage to property at park districts where they're going to do a lot of cleanup work. I think that's appropriate. But many kids who come into peer jury can be socially isolated, don't have a lot of friends, don't have a lot of activities. And so we can send them to the youth centers, or we can send them to places where they can do sports with kids with disabilities, their Special Recreation Association, or Our Place in New Church Township. We have art sites. We've got a couple of kids who are very creative and had done, unfortunately, they did artwork on public buildings. So we ended up sending them to the North Shore Art League, and actually one of our offenders designed a new logo for the North Shore Art League. So they were very happy with what he did for them. Regarding our service sites, we have around 18 in the program, local youth drop-in centers where we send the most kids, park districts, libraries, places where kids can do sports with kids with disabilities. I see no problem with sending a kid to a place where they might have some fun, where they might make some new friends, they might meet some, develop some new interests. Over the years, we've had offenders get hired by the community service site we've sent them to. The Winnetka Park District, I know, has hired many offenders that we've sent them to. The Wilmette Park District has, the Glencoe Park District has. Some kids have stayed on and serve on the youth board of one of the local youth drop-in centers. And these are success stories not just because a kid was released successfully, but because they developed a new interest or a new hobby or found a creative use of their time. And we can always find something for them to do here in peer jury. And we can also, I sent a lot of kids here to work in the food pantry as well to help out with food drives. So I had some kids this weekend doing a food drive for us. It was very successful. My favorite peer jury success story, and actually it's happened 3 or 4 times in the history of the program, is when we have sent young men to work at agencies that work with clients with disabilities. One site was the North Suburban Special Recreation Association, where they do after-school sports with kids with disabilities. Another site was Our Place in New Church Township, where they get involved with the transition program with young adults with disabilities, being friends to some of these people, or doing sports or after-school activities with them. I've had 3 or 4 kids who have decided they wanted to major in special education because of their experience in peer jury and because of their experience in working with kids with disabilities or adults with disabilities through their community service site. So it's very gratifying and personally fulfilling for me to know that, you know, we were able to help a kid decide on what his future was going to be through peer jury. So clearly the program benefits offenders who are given a second chance and can avoid a juvenile record and get a chance to redeem themselves. It benefits the police who would quite frankly much rather send kids to peer jury than send them to the juvenile court system. It's less expensive, it's less time consuming, and the police tell us that the kids in peer jury are actually much tougher on offenders than they are in the court system. If you go to the court system as a juvenile, you're going to be in front of a judge for 3 to 5 minutes. Here, the kids are going to ask you very tough questions for 15 or 20 minutes. They're going to ask questions of your parents. They're going to ask questions of the police officer. And they're going to come up with an appropriate sentence, which always involves community service. In about half of our cases, it may involve an apology letter or an essay or some sort of written assignment. But I think the one thing we don't talk about much in peer jury is the jurors. Once trained, they have a real role in the justice system and often have a better understanding of kids' motivations when they get in trouble than adults do. And I think kids sometimes have a better sense of when offenders are telling the truth than when adults do. I see kids learn to work cooperatively, learn to listen and make decisions under pressure, and feel empathy for victims, and I know of no other program where kids have more real decision-making responsibility than they do in the peer jury program. I stress the kids make the decision about sentencing. We do have some guidelines that were agreed upon with the police departments, but the kids often go outside the guidelines if they have a clear justification for doing so. And the police have no authority whatsoever to overturn the decision that is made by peer jury. Now, it doesn't mean that the police are always happy with the decision that they make. We have made some mistakes. When we have done so, we've instituted some new procedures in the program to correct those, and we now are at a point in the process where the police do have a role. We solicit as much input from the police as possible in deciding the sentence. So, but I stress, as the kids go off in the jury room back here, make a decision. There are no police officers back there in the jury room. The kids make the decisions. But I'm going to let the jurors tell you themselves about what they've learned. So I'd like to invite our 3 peer jury scholarship winners up here one at a time. Each of you is going to tell you what they learned in the program and what the program meant to them. And I have a plaque. And each of these jurors, it's a competitive process, but this year we have an especially difficult time picking a single winner. So we have 3 peer jury scholarship winners this year. Each of them are going to read their essay and be presented with a $1,000 check for college. So